Pathogenesis. Okay, so my presentation for whomever, tentatively titled Post-Mortem America and the Empire of the Herd. Section 1, Pathogenesis, Pain and Poverty and Suffering and Death. Section 1, the pathogenesis. This is how we got to this point of nihilist dearth in this society. The origins, pain and poverty and suffering and death. A quote from Julian Assange. Quote, United States political culture has gone mad, unquote. Julian Assange. He said this in November of 2017. Of course, Assange is correct here, but what he fails to recognize is that the madness is not confined to our political culture. Every aspect, every institution of American society is slowly becoming more and more psychotic every day, which is not to imply that it ever wasn't psychotic. The following succinct paragraph written by Northwestern University Germanist Eric Heller in the 1950s, 10 sentences, 251 words, explains almost all of the problems we have been experiencing in this society since the end of World War II and the passing of the greatest generation. This brief, insignificant appearing paragraph written in the 1950s explains in a nutshell all the social, political, racial, and ethnic, legal, psychological, moral, and religious problems we are experiencing in this country today. All these problems can be understood by its analysis. In the future, universities will have professors paid to analyze, discuss, and teach its meaning and implications for humanity's future, if humanity has a future. Pain and poverty and suffering and death. Where we live, soon nobody will be able to exist, for men become enemies, and each his own enemy. From now onward they will hate, however many comforts they will lavish upon themselves, and hate themselves with a new hatred, unconsciously at work in the depths of their souls. True, there will be ever better reformers of society, ever better socialists, and ever better hospitals, and an ever-increasing intolerance of pain and poverty and suffering and death, and an ever more fanatical craving for the greatest happiness of the greatest numbers. Yet the deepest impulse informing their striving will not be love and will not be compassion. Its true source will be the panic-struck determination not to have to ask the question, what is the meaning of our lives? The question which will remind them of the death of God, the uncomfortable question inscribed on the features of those who are uncomfortable and asked above all by pain and poverty and suffering and death. Rather than allowing that question to be asked, they will do everything to smoother the way from the face of humanity, for they cannot endure it. And yet they will despise themselves for not enduring it and for their guilt-ridden inability to answer it. And their self-hatred will betray them behind the back of their apparent charity and humanitarian concern. For there, they will assiduously construct the tools for the annihilation of humankind. There will be wars such as have never been waged on earth. Unquote. That is from Eric Heller's essay, The Artist's Journey into the Interior, which is the title of the book that contains the essay, with several other interesting and important essays. The term I have created to refer specifically to the concepts presented in this paragraph is Hellerian nihilism, after Eric Heller, a most insightful social observer who combined literary scholarship with psychological interception in order to make us aware of what is happening to our world. Eric Heller, The Artist's Journey into the Interior. Pain and poverty and suffering and death produce a society-wide or species-wide self-hatred. Humans create or discover narcotics against self-disgust, which I have classified elsewhere as distraction devices, symbolized by pinball from the rock opera Tommy by Pete Townsend and his group The Who. Everything Americans possess in this country, everything they do, can be seen in one way or another as a distraction device, an activity invented, created, and designed unconsciously, mostly, to distract them from the hatred they feel toward themselves, toward the rest of the species, toward the entire world, and even toward life itself. For their inability to any longer believe in anything above themselves and their own navels. The somersault of self-annihilation. These are tools that I have extracted from Heller's important essay. The somersault of self-annihilation. Tools of man's collective suicide. A new self-hatred. Annihilation of humankind. Narcotics against self-disgust. What is Hellerian nihilism? The inability to witness or even imagine the normal routine pain or suffering or death on the planet to the point where they are willing to destroy the planet and its environment rather than witness single incidents of pain or suffering or death, which is the norm in our world. This is what Heller means by the phrase the somersault of self-annihilation. When nihilism invades the collective psyche of a population, it splits like an atom into similar and dreadful phenomena. Nihilist developments and after effects since Heller, Hellerian nihilism we begin with. Loss of God nihilism has led to loss of God traumatization, nihilist trauma, nihilist traumatization, which has in turn led to loss of God psychosis, which is a form of what Heller refers to as spiritual derangement. Please love me nihilism, Snopes nihilism, also known as money nihilism, which can be witnessed throughout the country, particularly on Wall Street and in corporate America, but in every home in this country, in every chest, in every gulliva, in every gut. This shows itself one way as the phenomenon of never getting enough and making money for the sake of making money. Obsessively conspicuous consumption, conspicuous production, you might call it. Or in the words of punk rocker Henry Rollins, gimme, 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 I need some more. Gimme, 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 don't ask what for. Also, there's the Beatles song from Magical Mystery Tour. 6. Eloy nihilism, related to Talosianism and the evolution of the American herd. Better worldism, anti-Earth ideologies of every variety, world-weary nihilism, we are the world nihilism, political nihilism, and Disneylandism. Narcotics against self-disgust, varieties of narcotics in post-mortem America, business, conspicuous consumption, skateboarding, tightrope walking, the Grand Canyon, base jumping, sex, spring break, parties, orgies, entrepreneurship, pinball, and anything and everything else Americans do when they're not asleep in bed. They have done away with God, and yet the report of their own deed has not yet reached them. That's a quote from Eric Heller's essay, another part of his essay. Loss of God nihilism has produced nihilist trauma, which in turn has resulted in loss of God psychosis and accompanying spiritual derangement. Spiritual derangement, of course, like an amoeba, stretches out and absorbs the psychology of the psyche of the individual person and deranges the psychology. So we see clinical pathologies, symptoms of pathologies developing in people all over the country and all over the Western world. And this is what they're doing with the bones in their noses and the pink hair and all this other crap. It's just spiritual derangement from loss of God trauma. Loss of God nihilism, the loss of God, the loss of morality, and its effect on the American and European head. Non-theistic loss of God panic, similar to homosexual panic. Little notes that I make to myself, questions that I answer, that I think through the question to come up with the answer, which produces all of these wonderful words that I'm reading to you now. Apply to people who come to the realization that they really don't believe in God anymore, or maybe never did in the first place. It can be extremely psychologically scarring for many people. This is why they completely ignore or repress this information from consciousness. Loss of God nihilism has produced outright psychosis in the American populace. Laymen misunderstand that there are temporary psychotic states and partial psychotic states. People in the throes of psychotic states aren't necessarily drooling and babbling wastoids. Often the reality testing of peoples and societies can go in and out of focus. Self-deception always involves psychotic states of some kind, or vice versa, or both. Post-mortem Americans are the most self-deceiving populace, at least since the early Middle Ages. This includes eras of witch hunting of the Middle Ages and the Spanish Inquisition. Please love me nihilism. This should make you love me. Statements today, values, morals, opinions, etc. They are not truth, meaning they are not how people really feel. Subtext to every utterance or behavior. This should make you like me, or this should make you love me. Nihilism is real. The effects of nihilism are real too. Nihilism is a real spiritual disorder with terrible social, political, economic, moral, religious, psychological consequences for contemporary humans. We are witnessing these consequences throughout the society today. Nihilism itself becomes a mental philosophical disorder and morphs into other mental disorders. The triangle, I refer to the triangle of nihilism. Nihilism, hedonism, narcissism, and alienation are entwined together, so I expanded it. Radiation decay and radiation distribution of related radioactive nihilist phenomena connected to and maybe resulting from post-World War II Hellerian nihilism. Note, please forgive these diagrams. At this time I cannot figure out how to make the word appear at each point of the geometric shape to make the desired visual impression, but hopefully you get the point. No pun. The triangle of nihilism. Nihilism at the top, hedonism, narcissism. Should be the other way around. It should be an inverted triangle because you start out with nihilism and it rises up to the level. It produces narcissism and hedonism, which produce each other. The rectangle of nihilism. Nihilism, hedonism, narcissism, alienation. When we become more hedonistic, which means when we become more habituated to giving into pleasurable pursuits or pleasurable, God fucking damn it, my brain can't wake up today, I'm sorry. More pleasurable impulses, we start to worry and flee more hysterically from painful situations. We start to worry, we start to look around at other people and worry, well, you know, they're in pursuit of these hedonistic, philosophy of life too, and there are limited resources. So what if they start to try to take some of my pleasurable resources? You know, what if the other guy gets the raise? What if the guy in the desk over gets the raise over me that he's been sucking up to the boss for? And then he has more money with which to take out the fake blonde with the big fake tits and the hooker shoes in the secretary pool. That he's been competing with me for the pleasures and favors of all this time. So that produces alienation. The pentangle of nihilism. Nihilism, hedonism, narcissism, alienation, decadence. Decadence is the plastic, visible effects of hedonism and narcissism. The circle of nihilism, because there's more. Sorry, I don't know how to make this circle diagram. Nihilism, narcissism, hedonism, alienation, decadence, anime, and more are all intertwined. They grow like weeds around the nihilist flower. You know, there are lots of weeds that grow that have flowers. Pretty, colorful flowers. Yellow, red, orange, whatever. Are all intertwined. The circle of nihilism. Not every symptom of PMA's problems can be attributed to Hellerian nihilism and its after effects alone, but it is the single most influential factor at work. Spiritual derangement. All the bizarre ideas and behavior we're witnessing in this country today, all the conflicting notions and contradictory values, are the direct result of the mental, emotional, and spiritual derangement caused by loss of God psychosis announced by Hellerian nihilism, predicted by Hellerian nihilism. This nihilism is real. This nihilism is not some ivory tower theoretical construct that can be ignored or some esoteric theological blather or babble. I see it at work everywhere in post-mortem American society and every person I observe every minute of the day. It has attached itself to every brain cell of every American, not to mention every Euro-American. Linguistic nominality and the values vacuum. There's been a divestiture of meaning everywhere in PMA society. Nothing has meaning for the society anymore. We are experiencing a divestiture of meaning overall throughout the society. Systematically, our society is making everything meaningless that once had meaning. For example, wedding dresses. Brides used to wear virgin white wedding gown to show that she was pure sexually, meaning she was a virgin. Women who remarry after a divorce or widowhood usually do not wear a white wedding gown. Today, brides wear white wedding gowns even though they have been living with their fiancé boyfriends and fucking them for years. Now marriage itself is no longer has any meaning. It's about nihilism pure and simple, no pun intended. Of course, there's another angle on that today, which is the feminist bullshit angle. And they'll get angry and argue, well, a woman isn't property, so a man shouldn't expect her to be a virgin, blah, blah, all this kind of shit. But there's two completely different issues. They're both propelled by the same causes. But the symptoms and the effects and the problems they engender are different. Society and cultural nominality. Social nominalism, nihilistic nominalism, linguistic social nominalism. Airplane peanuts are an example of linguistic nominality. When people no longer believe in anything anymore, they experience nihilist dread, and their language experiences nihilist dread as well. They don't want to think to themselves that their words had no meaning, that they don't believe in anything anymore. So they become, not their belief system becomes nominal, good job function becomes nominalism, the relationship become nominal. Post-structural ideologies have influenced the ability of words to mean anything at all, ever, including the words needed to make arguments about post-ritual linguistic lack of meaning and meaninglessness. Social nominalism and linguistic nominality. Direct result of total nihilism of postmortem America. Post-structural and deconstructive ideologies have influenced the ability of words to mean anything at all ever in the real world, including the words needed to make arguments about post-structural linguistic lack of meaning. Deconstruction of language applicable to the ivory tower and dreamers in academia, whose dreams are derived from better worldism and therefore psychotic. Common people on the street have never heard of deconstruction, but it still has seeped down into the soil, and it is having a real measurable effect. Airplane peanuts are an ominous example in the society today of what I call linguistic nominality. When people no longer believe in anything anymore, they become nihilistic. But they don't want to think of themselves as if they don't believe in anything, so they retain a semblance of a former belief systems. They use the words, but they no longer remember what the words originally meant or referred to. But they become nominal. Their job function becomes nominal. The personal relationships become nominal. Words become placeholders for the ideas they use to represent, like variables in algebra or in statistics. The airlines serve you a tiny bag of peanuts, and then they can say they fed their passengers. And there's a moral aspect to that also. There's a money aspect, which is that, well, you know, we're supposed to feed our passengers, but we want to save money, blah, 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 whatever. But the problem is, there's also a subconscious application element going on, where they really believe. It's one thing to say, okay, well, we want to save money, and legally we can't, there are no legal repercussions because we fed them, and we said we gave them food, and we said we did it. Okay? So to ease their conscience and cognitive dissonance, they start to believe that the peanuts really were a meal, that they really did do what they're supposed to do. Decadence directs postmortem America, not a flavor of ice cream, but a seriously destructive force in postmortem American society. Not all overindulgence is decadence. Sometimes you're dealing with drive for excellence or superiority. The parable of the royal baker. The royal baker invents new cakes and pies and pastries to one end, for one purpose, to please the palate of the king. If he succeeds, he passes on his new recipe to the other bakers throughout the Commonwealth. As for the king, if he's a real king, he's not interested in having his palate pleased. He's not interested in his own pleasure or pleasure in general. His interest is that his royal bakers and all the kingdom's other bakers are as brilliant as possible at what they do. He wants the kingdom's bakers to attain the highest degree of excellence in what they do, regardless of what it is. And he does this for no other reason than for the pursuit of excellence. Art for art's sake, and the pursuit of excellence for the pursuit of excellence's sake. He wants everybody in his kingdom, and ultimately everybody in the world, if possible, to strive for excellence in whatever they do. The pursuit of excellence is its own reward. Weird, huh? You see, we're completely losing this value, this feeling, this mode of being in the world. We're completely losing it. People don't pass away, they die. People are no longer able to deal with death to the extreme that they cannot even speak the words death or died anymore. Because of loss of God nihilism and the resulting loss of God panic and loss of God psychosis, people cannot deal with death as they have in the past, with the assistance of comforting religious myths and rituals. People today are so loaded with hilarious nihilism, they cannot even speak the words death or die. And so we have new phenomena such as spontaneous memorials springing up everywhere in the country. More discussion of spontaneous memorials below. Why you are a nihilist. A confusion about what the word itself literally means. Confusion between morality and legality of a society resulting in nihilism. Morality is not a list of do's and don'ts. Morality is a prescription for a kind of person, according to the culture of that society they're operating in. Some cultures strive to produce citizens who are completely honest, such as the founders and the framers of revolutionary America. Some cultures value a person morally who is a good liar. For example, during the period of the Arab empires, the Abbasid dynasty and the Umayyad dynasty and the Moors in Spain and throughout the Middle East. Some cultures value above all prowess in personal combat. Every culture except us. Some cultures value above all a person who can't joust well. For example, a person who can joust well, for example, King Arthur's Britain. Some cultures value creating persons who are helpless, weak, and conformist. For example, post-mortem American society. Judaism and Christianity corrupted and perverted the concept of morality. And now we don't even have that definition for people to cease to believe in. Icons of nihilism. We witness today a new form of religious communion, techno-toys. I watch people in the subway communing with their little lecking devices. Members of the herd have successfully refocused their God cathexis to material objects. They exhibit a religious, worshipful relationship with their toys. Nihilism produces obliviousness and other symptoms. Obliviousness is a deeper form of distraction device. It's a psychological defense mechanism against self-disgust in the Hillarian sense. Dialogue from Syriana, a Middle East spy adventure movie with a message. If any of you have not seen this movie, here, let me set the backstory. Bob is a CIA, Bob, played by some big famous actor who's very popular today. Bob is a CIA operative who speaks Farsi, operating in Iran and Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. Musawi is an Iranian agent who is connected with Hezbollah. Musawi has Bob naked and tied duct tape to a heavy wooden chair. He struggles but cannot move at all. His hands are taped down to the armrests of the chair so that the fingers of each hand are exposed, but he cannot pull them away. Musawi wants names from Bob and is preparing to torture him to get them. He has a pair of end cutter pliers. Those are the pliers with a flat end on the end. Of all the different kinds of pliers that mechanics use, these are the ones that are best designed to pull somebody's fingernails off their fingers if you decided that that was a pursuit you wanted to engage in. He has a pair of end cutter pliers and is about to use them to rip Bob's fingernails out one by one. Musawi. Bob. What do you know about torture methods used by the Chinese on the Falun Gong? Method number 1. What's your guess? Water dungeon. Did you guess water dungeon? Number 2 method. Number 2, twisting arm and putting face in feces. Not interested in 2? Number 3. Number 3 is called pulling nails from fingers. What do you think, Bob? Number 3 sound good to you? The purpose is to get the monks or whatever to recant their beliefs. What if I had to get you to recant? That'd be pretty much difficult, right? Because if you have no beliefs to recant, then what? Well, then you're fucked is what, Bob? So in other words, Musawi is a third world person looking up at the first world with ressentiment. This is a different angle on it, but I'm trying to explain everything that's going on psychologically, philosophically, spiritually here. Okay, for starters, he's looking up at the first world and he's saying, you people are nihilists. You believe in nothing anymore. How can I get you to recant your beliefs? If you have no beliefs to recant, I'm just going to be pulling your fingernails out of their sockets for the pleasure of doing it, or whatever. Okay, but also there's an element of ressentiment because he's saying the funny thing is that these people in these third world countries never believed in anything in the first place. It's like that great quote from George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, where the garbage collector is at the upper class professor's house, and he says, well, you can have my daughter for 10 pounds or whatever it is. And he says, have you no morals, man? And he looks at him, he stares back at him, he says, I can't afford him, governor. Now you can't hear me, your ears are truly sealed. You can't speak either, your mouth is filled. You can see nothing, and pinball completes the scene. Here comes Uncle Ernie to guide you to your very own machine. That's a quote from the end of Tommy, the rock opera by The Who. Somersaults of Self-Annihilation, Robert Crumb's History of American Pictures. Now, this famous Robert Crumb was this great political cartoonist from the 60s who was, when I was a kid growing up in the 60s and the first half of the decade of the 70s, his cartoons were everywhere. And he has a picture of a beautiful grassy field with a forest and a clear sky with birds. Then there's the next picture of the same field, but a train running through it. Then there's a road and telegraph and a house. Then it gets worse and worse and worse until you have the last picture looks like any residential street in New York City. It's just a disgusting mess. Something went wrong somewhere. Life is strife, and that's the way it should and must be. Weak people, who are further weakened by Hilarion nihilism, are too weak to subsist with strife. They arm themselves for a war against life's natural strife. This mindset evolves into better worldism. Alan Pratt. This is a quote from Alan Pratt on Oswald Spengler on nihilism. Quote, Oswald Spengler, in The Decline of the West, published in 1926, studied several cultures to confirm that patterns of nihilism were indeed a conspicuous feature of collapsing civilization. In each of the failed cultures he examines, Spengler noticed that centuries-old religious, artistic, and political traditions were weakened and finally toppled by the insidious workings of several distinct nihilist postures. The Faustian nihilist shatters the ideals. The Apollonian nihilist watches them crumble before his eyes, and the Indian nihilist withdraws from their presence into himself. Western civilization is already in the advanced stages of decay, with all three forms of nihilism working to undermine epistemological authority and ontological grounding. Alan Pratt. I don't remember where I got that from. Please love me nihilism. Please love me nihilism and contemporary liberalism. Nihilism exposes the weakness of the weak are the herd. This exposure enhances their desperation to belong, to be accepted by others in general and by the rest of the herd itself. This causes members of the herd to pervert or distort the presentation of an already pseudo-identity, to make it more acceptable to the others. This is where some of the rage and hatred of college students, left-wingers, liberals, feminists, homosexuals, and such like comes from. This is its psychodynamic source. They hate whomever the group says to hate, so that the group will love and accept them. Ironic, they have to hate in order to get love. This is how the personality that is cult vulnerable develops. Flo Conway and Jim Siegelman referred to the development of this cult vulnerable personality type as snapping. We no longer have any snapping today because everybody in the country has snapped a long time ago. We are in a post-snapping society at this time. Liberalism is no longer a political agenda. It is an outright bona fide religious cult. Left-wing lunanism and its followers are as irrational and as intolerant of questioning, alternative viewpoints, or criticism as any of the most hilarious religious cults to have emerged in the last 50 years, including the Moonies, the Hare Krishnas, Heaven's Gate, People's Temple, the Bhagwan, Om Shinri Kyo, or any others you could name. The problem is the majority of the people in this country follow this cult and have no idea that they have swapped this cult for the God of Judeo-Christianity cult. Nihilism is interrelated to alienation, which is interrelated to hedonism, which is interconnected to decadism, which is interconnected to narcissism, which is interconnected with anime, which is interconnected with the herd. This values cocktail produces feminism and demand for exaggerated women's rights, tolerance for homosexuality, encouragement of complaints from on the part of historically troublesome racial ethnic minorities like Jews and Negroes, desire for universal peace and love, hatred toward tradition, hatred toward democracy, hatred for establishment values due to hatred of the framers and founders as dead white men, attempts to cancel out the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the system, whatever that term might mean to members of the herd, all the other many trappings of left-wing liberal loonyism or lunism. Why you are a nihilist? Confusion, conflation between morality of a society and the laws of a society. Morality is not a list of do's and don'ts. This is what a legal system is about. Morality is a prescription for a kind of person. Judaism and Christianity corrupted, perverted the concept of morality, and now we don't even have that moral code anymore. It made it easy for people to cease to believe in it. Distraction, vices, and American lostness. Loss of God nihilism has reduced the need for distraction devices and American lostness. Everything is pinball, is everything. Everything is pinball, is everything. It's like art is everything and everything is art. There is no such thing as religious conversion. People today don't even believe in the religion they're born into. My sister thinks she's a pagan. She thinks she's converted to paganism some years back. She and some of her friends who are also converted pagans go out into the woods and worship the trees. You don't just get up one day and say, I'm going to convert to another religion today. You cannot convert to any religion, really. That's just not the way things work. In order to believe in a religion, you have to be raised in it from day one. It has to be ingrained in every fiber of your being from before times you have any memory of it. Okay? Our religious ideas come from our paternalistic views, our image of our father as even more powerful than our breast-giving, milk-giving mother, because he's bigger and stronger. When the child's ego begins, and sense of self slowly begins to develop at like 5 or 6 months, a year, 2 years, 2 years, 2 months, okay? They see daddy is big, and they see mommy is bigger and stronger than them, and can feed them, can physically protect them, can do away with their painful feelings like hunger by giving them the breast, giving the child the breast, give them pleasure, etc., etc. So it's subconsciously planted. So the mother is powerful. The father, when the child becomes to different, you know, I mean, infants take a few weeks or few months. I forgot exactly what psychology says is the standard time now, to develop the idea that they are separate from their mother, because, you know, for most of their existence, they weren't separate from mother. They were actually part of the mother's body. So as the consciousness begins to develop even further, they start to realize not only is mother separate from me, but mother is separate from father, who is separate from me. The lostness of postmortem America and postmortem Euro-America, the lostness of postmortem Americans. A narcotic against self-disgust, Eric Heller. We are witnessing the derangement Heller predicted throughout Western civilization. The time is fast approaching. This is a quote from another essay by Heller. Quote, the time is fast approaching when secular crusaders, tools of man's collective suicide, will devastate the world with their rival claims to compensate for the lost kingdom of heaven by setting up on earth the ideological rules of love and justice, which by the very force of the spiritual derangement, italics mind, will lead to the rules of cruelty and slavery, and the war for global domination will be fought on behalf of philosophical doctrines. In the past, wars were fought on behalf of land, on behalf of resources, on behalf of women, of which at one point women, you know, for most of human society, for most of human history, women were a form of property, which they still are. We just pretend that they aren't. For their own ego's sakes. They need to puff up their ego now because they can. Okay? Women were a resource because they were part of society. Number one, they were good for sex. And number two, the sex produced offspring, which could help with the workload. Hellerian derangement. People are punishing themselves in this society for their own lack of ability to believe in anything. Nobody really believes, this is a quote from Alan Bloom, nobody really believes in anything anymore, and everyone spends his life in frenzied work and frenzied play so as not to face the fact, not to look into the abyss. Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Plastic pacifism. Quote, the time prides itself on its pacifism. The truth is that men no longer believe in anything strongly enough to fight for it. Unquote. That's a quote from Leo Strauss from his work, A History of Political Philosophy. Here's another 60s song that talks about this phenomenon. It's funny because these poets like Dylan and Paul Simon and the Beatles and whomever, they sensed that these things were going on as artists in a limited sense, meaning songwriters. They sensed what was going on, but they didn't really understand it completely, and they didn't understand its cause. They didn't want to understand its cause. So they wrote songs that for the first time revealed this. They were revelatory. This is why so many members of the herd, I've met guys of my generation or slightly older who worship Bob Dylan as some kind of like religious prophet. Kathy, I'm lost, I said, although I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching, and I don't know why. That's from the song America. Loss of God, nihilism is why, of course. We're not going to take it. Quote from, Pete Townsend, The Who, from the rock opera Tommy. Now you can't hear me, your ears are truly sealed. You can't speak either, your mouth is filled. You can see nothing, and pinball completes the scene. Here comes Uncle Ernie to guide you to your very own machine. Anybody who's listened to the record and knows anything about the story of the opera, Uncle Ernie is a pedophile child molester. He molested young Tommy when Tommy was still blind, deaf, and dumb. It's all just pinball. My little brother thinks he plays poker in big poker tournaments. You just think you play poker. What you're playing is, in actuality, pinball. You're playing pinball like everybody else in America. It's all pinball. Everything is pinball. Everything in PMA is about pinball. Every action, activity, act is, at its essence, pinball. Narcissism, its privileges and pleasures, compensates for nihilism, hedonism, and the rest follows soon after. That is the end of that.